Welcome to Rock You Like a Hurricane Rana. A bit of a different episode here. We just wanted to put something out. Of course, a pretty sad time for the pro wrestling world. We did hear of the news of the passing of Jim The Anvil Neidhart. So we thought we'd just put this together, have a quick chat about him. I think he's one of the more underrated and underappreciated legends in wrestling.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people say that whenever like a musician or an athlete or a wrestler dies, oh, they were underrated. But I say this, I've been saying this for as long as I've been watching wrestling with a mature mindset, I guess. Jim Neidhart was legitimately incredibly underrated, and especially in the era of like the big men, in like the era of a heavyweight, he was like, because he was up against like Demolition and guys like that, and he was always, I guess, in their shadow, so to speak, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, well, I guess at that time he was sort of almost in between. He wasn't a traditional big man for the 80s sense, but he also wasn't your typical smaller wrestler either. He was a mix of everything, especially in his prime. And I guess, we just wanted to put this out there just to talk about some of the highlights. Passing away at the age of 63.
Yes.
It's kind of weird because I suppose a lot of people would look at that as being young.
Yeah.
But sadly, in the pro wrestling world, that's almost not a bad run either.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially
from that era, I guess.
Yeah. So we don't know the full details there, but we just wanted to go through the highlights. And I guess for people who did grow up watching him, and even for people who I guess never really watched that stuff or are a bit younger, hopefully we can just recommend some highlights to check out.
Yeah, well, I guess we should say, like, this is an era you didn't particularly grow up watching, but you know a lot about.
Oh, this is what I grew up watching.
This is like and I kind of watched a little bit of this growing up through like old tapes that I was getting. So I know a little bits and pieces, and I think that's what drew me to like Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation and Anvil as well. It was like, I think it was the bright pink suits.
Oh man, their outfits were awesome.
They were so cool.
And it's funny, you watch them growing up as a kid, and there's none of that like, oh, pink is weird for a boy to wear. It's like, pink is awesome. These guys are cool as shit.
These guys are wearing pink and black, and they are absolute badasses.
Yeah.
And they're beating the crap out of people.
And I guess, like, obviously both of us are definitely too young to have seen him, compete in Stampede Wrestling.
Yeah.
But if we start with just what, the boom of the golden era for the WWF in the late 80s, mid 80s, the Hart Foundation were a massive part of all of that.
Yeah, they were like that. Yeah, they were pretty much like the thing. Like they were
the best tag team.
Oh, I still think they're one of the best tag teams of all time.
Yep.
And like just the two of them, like because you've got like the agility and technical prowess of Bret Hart, and then you've got the agility and technicality of Jim Neidhart, but he was the powerhouse. I said this to you this morning when I was messaging you because I was watching a few old matches this morning. I think that's what we always do anyway when in these circumstances. But he was like, because a lot of like maybe younger people these days would like the hot tag big guys like Big E. He's like in the New Day, he gets the hot tag and the crowd go wild. That was Jim Neidhart in the late 80s. When he got the hot tag from Bret, the crowd lost their marbles. They went mental for it.
He was the charismatic, fired up one. Big E is the best comparison to make to a modern star.
I think so, yeah, absolutely.
Both super athletic, but both sort of like deceptively quick. They would both do things in their hot tag that the typical big man wouldn't. Jim Neidhart would do like a slingshot shoulder tackle. He'd do dives to the outside sometimes.
Yeah.
He'd just charge into dudes. He'd power slam them. And you see a lot of that influence in how Big E wrestles. And it's funny, going back to the Hart Foundation's prime, they started off with Jimmy Hart as their manager.
Yeah, in like 85?
Yeah. And that's sort of where the name comes from, of course. Bret Hart, Jim Neidhart, Jimmy Hart. Yeah. None of them related by blood. Neidhart and Bret through marriage.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy just coincidentally. And Jimmy would do most of the talking. Bret wasn't comfortable on the mic at the time.
No.
He explained, he would wear the sunglasses to sort of make himself feel more comfortable. But Jim Neidhart could carry the promos.
Yeah, because I feel like he was I feel like it's a gimmick that's kind of overdone in current wrestling, but he was the first to nail that psychotic guy.
Yeah, like this jacked up, just like yelling and overly excited.
That I think everyone knows him because that like the iconic like manic laugh that he does, which we'll play a bit later in in a little clip we'll play.
Yeah, and even the goatee is, iconic.
Yeah. I think one of the tributes I saw go around this morning was like a pink background, and all it has was the aviators and like the blonde red goatee.
Yeah.
That's all I had. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Because that's pretty much what it was.
If we're talking iconic wrestling facial hair from the 80s, there was Hogan's Mo, and there was
Jim
Anvil's
like goatee. Oh, absolutely.
That's
yeah,
it.
Absolutely.
And if we're talking great matches, I guess for them it almost starts for a lot of people their feud with the British Bulldogs.
Yes.
Two guys who they obviously would have known and wrestled plenty of times.
Yeah.
Their other brother-in-law, Davey Boy.
Yeah.
And Davey Boy's cousin, Dynamite Kid. So there is even that connection there.
Yeah.
It's almost like these Calgary guys sort of bringing that fast-paced style to the WWF, which people wouldn't have seen before that.
And that was because the WWF brought out Stampede as well.
Yeah.
So, and I was actually I was reading before, like the two main things in that, like in the contract, were you buy WWF, you also get Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart. That was part of the contract.
It's a good deal.
Absolutely, jackpot.
Yeah, exactly. And they hit the jackpot. They became the tag champs. And they were really good heels.
Yeah, I said this to you like just before we started recording. Bret Hart was, I think, a heel. Like Bret Hart was better as a heel, but Jim Neidhart was like, I feel like, as I said just before, like his character, like the whole manic thing, it suits a heel anyway.
Yeah.
But him being like 6'2", just an absolute like stack of muscle, and being that era of like big guy wrestling, he was the perfect heel to have.
Yeah.
And a perfect enforcer.
And I think he sort of brought the charisma out of Bret. You watch those early years.
Yep.
I think Bret was sort of like influenced by Anvil's charisma and energy and enthusiasm, and that would bring Bret out of his shell.
Yeah.
And eventually, once they both turned, when they turned and became sort of the heroes, it wasn't hard for people to gravitate towards them.
Yeah.
And again, I think Anvil's the bigger part of that when they were a tag team. Because of, again, the charisma and the energy.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so we were discussing this just before, because I've read Bret Hart's book twice now, I think. Have you read it or not?
I've read it 1.5 times.
Yeah.
I read it once and I loved it, and then I thought I'll read it again, but I skipped to like when he gets to the WWF. But it's a great book.
But see, I love the part where like Jim Neidhart comes into play, and like into the, I guess, the story of it all. So he was actually on the Dallas Cowboys NFL team. He was a football player. Stu Hart did some scouting and was he was in Calgary one day, and Jim was in Calgary, and he was like, "Oh, this guy's big. I could probably train to be a wrestler." And that's honestly how it happened. Like, it was just they got along. He started training at the Hart Dungeon and worked at Stampede Wrestling, and then he got the name The Anvil because he was entered into a anvil throwing competition at a Calgary State Fair.
Yeah.
At Calgary Stampede State Fair.
So the Calgary Stampede was like the huge festival they'd have there. It was like a rodeo festival, this huge thing. There was wrestling there. Obviously, the Harts were involved.
Yeah, it's kind of like that end scene of Grease where it's like that big carnival thing.
I think it was bigger than that.
Bigger than that.
Yeah, and when the car flew off, imagine Jim Neidhart throwing the anvil. That's how it went.
He threw it 11 feet, which is 3.5 meters.
Jesus.
Like, think of that like crushing Wile E. Coyote in the Looney Tunes cartoons.
Yeah.
And like he threw it at like 3.5 meters, which is crazy.
I think they knew on the spot. You're the anvil.
You're the anvil. You're the guy. And he's like, he went on to be. He proved that string so many times in the ring as well.
Yeah. So I don't want to be a dick about it, but it was kind of weird on Raw in their tribute video. They're like, from his shot put days in high school, he had the nickname The Anvil. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's wrong.
Yeah.
And it was. Anyway, he was also a champion shot putter in his early days.
Yeah.
So he was a strong motherfucker.
He really, really was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said, it shows in a lot of the early matches that they had to prove. And even if you go back and watch a bit of like Canadian Stampede before, he's very clean shaven and has like long hair. It's kind of weird to see that when you like go back and watch that. It's like, it doesn't even look anything like how he did in like the glory years,
the peak Hart Foundation years. If we're talking highlights, it's really easy with the Hart Foundation.
Yes.
It's literally any match they're in.
Yeah, it's fun.
But any tag team they're wrestling, it's probably really good.
You say that, and people could be like, "Oh, you're just saying that," but I'm like, "No, I'm not.
Yeah,
like, we're not just saying that because they were
so good,
so good."
In a way, it's easier because of the time there were less pay-per-views and less TV shows. But that doesn't matter. Any pay-per-view match they're in, any major Saturday night's main event or the main event or whatever match, it's probably good. The Rougeau brothers. Demolition,
with them,
the Brainbusters, everyone. Well, I guess the Rougeau brothers became heels. The Hart Foundation became faces. Jimmy Hart left the Hart Foundation and became the Rougeau's manager.
So there was that.
So you had that like
that,
big double thing.
Yeah.
All being athletic Canadian dudes, pretty much. They all really really good stuff there.
So you mentioned the Rougeau brothers. We may as well mention that match from the 1989 Royal Rumble.
Yes,
as you said to me when you got here, one of the hottest crowds ever.
Look, I love 6-man tags.
6-man tags are always great.
So good, they're so good, and this one is a classic. It's the Hart Foundation and Jim Duggan, another underrated guy.
So you got the Pride of Canada and the Pride of the USA.
The Pride of the USA teaming up to take on these damn French Canadians. It was Dino Bravo and the Rougeau brothers. Oh my God, the crowd is just, going wild the whole time.
Yeah, it was, and that's a 2 out of 3 falls match as well. And that was a stipulation used a lot in the 80s, but for some reason with the Hart Foundation as well, that was like, it must have been like their thing, their bread and butter.
Yeah.
And then they beat the Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine at WrestleMania 5.
Yeah, just sort of a quick match. Pretty good, though. I mean, if anyone's going to get a good match out of 80s Honky Tonk and Greg Valentine, probably the Harts. It's as good as you're going to get.
Yeah, but and then at the time, though, Neidhart proved himself as a singles wrestler as well. He had a mini feud with Rick Rude for the IC belt.
Yeah, they would do this sometimes where you'd see one of the tag guys they test it out. Because I think at the time, Vince McMahon still saw more in Neidhart than he did in Brett.
Yeah.
So we would have tested the waters with him.
Absolutely. If you can find, or just jump on the network, I guess, because it's super easy to do it with, I guess, WWE compared to older stuff.
Yeah.
But, find a couple of his matches, because Rick Rude was obviously he was the body. He was the man of the 80s, more or less. That wasn't Hogan.
Yeah,
his IC title run was really good, and you put in someone like Neidhart to kind of, I guess, throw a bit of a fork in the works and try and ruin it, but in storyline, so to speak. But it proved that he was also he could go.
He could have if he didn't have different issues throughout his time. I think a lot of people thought he would have been a bigger single star as well.
Yeah. Because he was the perfect, I guess, I keep harping on it, but it was the time. He was the perfect build for it.
Yeah.
He was the perfect build to be a singles, heavyweight champion in the late 80s, early 90s. He was 6'2", he was plus 300 pounds, he
could talk, he could move.
Yeah, he had character, he was the dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess if we're getting to... It's cool that with time, this has sort of become one of their iconic matches because I felt like it got overlooked for a while. But their match at SummerSlam against Demolition
in 1990,
another 2 out of 3 falls match, is so damn good.
I feel like it's the match that if you want to show people how to understand ring psychology and how wrestling works, this is the one to do it, and how tag team wrestling should be done. Because it is pure brilliance, that match.
And another one where the crowd is just so into it.
The crowd is so hot for it. And I'll say it again. So, I probably finished watching it about an hour ago. Again, Neidhart starts the match off. Brett starts this one on the apron. And then Brett tags in pretty early. And then the hot tag, when the crowd loses they just go mental when the hot tag happens. Because they'd waited so long for Neidhart to come in and clean house.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of their matches work. Brett was the guy to get beat up and lead to that crazy hot tag. And I think we should mention their great tag team finisher because at the time, guys had set tag team finishing moves.
Yeah.
The heart attack. Simple, but great.
Just so good.
Always had really good impact. Super cool. Almost like a spine buster with Brett doing a clothesline from behind to knock the
like
dude
a running
over.
clothesline. Yeah, it was just that absolutely one of my favorite like tag team moves in wrestling.
Yeah,
well, definitely one of like some. But the thing is, it doesn't get used as much these days, which I don't mind.
yeah. You shouldn't overdo that one.
Yeah.
Other great matches against the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. You can't go wrong. Thankfully, those guys were in the WWE. Like, it was a quick run, but they at least got to wrestle the Hart Foundation. It was like two of the best tag teams of the era.
You've got four of the best wrestlers of that time.
Yeah.
Arguably of that time. Wrestling each other.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay. I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Like, and then when you look back at that now, going, oh wow, that's imagine those four wrestling in today's wrestling climate.
Yeah.
Like those four in their peak in today's wrestling climate. It's
People would lose their minds.
Exactly.
10 stars.
Yeah, literally.
And they did wrestle the Rockers a few times. You can find the matches. There is the match where the Rockers win the tag titles. It's never really acknowledged because the rope broke and blah, blah, depending on whose story you want to believe.
Yeah.
They didn't decide to air it. But the match exists. It's on a DVD, so you can find it online somewhere. Even with a broken rope, these guys still put together a good match.
Yes.
Supposedly, they didn't think it was good enough to air, but that's still a really good match. I feel like that one's 2 out of 3 falls as well.
Yeah.
Because every match was. For some reason.
Then, so then not long after that, like there was the new Hart Foundation, which
where he teams with Owen.
Yeah.
Still good. It never became a big thing, but, it's obviously going to be good.
And he left WWF, does like ECW New Japan for a tiny bit. Didn't do New Japan for a lot, but he was there because they had like some sort of working relationship.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did some cool stuff around Japan for a bit, and then debuted for WCW. Very very briefly in 93 when WCW was still in the TV studio.
Yeah, you could go there for a bit and then you could go back to the WWF.
Yeah, and then he went back to WWF in between 94 and 97, and that's when like the reunion with Owen happened.
Yeah, so he would team with Owen when Owen was doing his heel feud with Brett, sort of chasing the title.
Yep.
A few years later, in 97, when the Hart Foundation forms as a faction, you've got Brett, Owen, Neidhart, Davey, and Pillman.
Yeah.
And they have one of the best heel group runs for a few months.
What a stable, hey?
Yeah.
And it's really weird.
And he sort of takes the enforcer role. He wasn't necessarily having matches that are, classic matches. That wasn't his story. His story was to be the muscle.
And just to absolutely, just go in there and just beat the hell out of people when it needed to be happen.
And it was cool to see him and Brett together again.
Yeah.
Because, they hadn't been together for so long as well.
Yeah. And that little bit of a throwback. Because, it was just over 10 years since they joined.
Yeah.
Being in, 97. Yeah, it was about 12 years since they joined the WWF. So.
And I guess, actually, we should mention as well, the match where they lose the tag titles for the last time at WrestleMania 7 against the Nasty Boys.
Great match.
Again, if you look at the Nasty Boys and you think, oh, those guys probably had boring matches, watch that match against the Hart Foundation.
Yeah.
It's fucking good.
I'm going to say it, it's so weird how, they are, and we say they're one of the greatest tag teams of all time. They are one of the greatest tag teams of all time. They're only 2-time champions.
The Hart Foundation.
Yeah.
2 pretty long reigns, though. But it wasn't... Yeah.
Yeah, when you look at it these days, you could hold belts for a week or so and still do a fair bit. Back then, though, because wrestling wasn't as on all the time, it wasn't as prominent. So... And that's why reigns meant so much, I guess.
Yeah, 2 title reigns. Don't look at the number and think, oh, only twice. Yeah, they wrestled everyone,
and they had they had the awesome belts too. Those awesome old school tag belts.
The tag belt,
yeah,
the classic big square one. I love that title so much.
So cool.
And they were the icons with it.
Yeah.
Jumping back to 97, the Hart Foundation storyline is so good, Canada versus USA.
Yep.
I think Jim Neidhart's final, great WWE moment and also you could say the same for probably Davey Boy and Pillman. The 10-man tag at Canadian Stampede.
I was just about to bring this up. Many people say that this is one of the best pay-per-views of all time.
Mm-hmm.
From the card itself, but to also that main event.
Yeah. And again, another one where you can't believe how hot the crowd is.
From start to finish, too.
This is the peak. You're in Canada. You're in Calgary. All the Hearts are ringside. All the family is ringside. The whole family's in the ring, too.
Yeah.
And it's a hell of a match.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. So it's the Hart Foundation. It's Brett, Brian Pillman, British Bulldog, The Anvil, and Owen versus Ken Shamrock, Goldust, Animal and Hawk from Legion of Doom, and Stone Cold.
Yeah.
That's 10 names that, like, just have that defined 90s wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a 10-man tags can usually mean it's a bit of a cluster.
Yeah.
Not this one. There's so much story going on in this match.
Absolutely. From Owen's injury to, Austin getting sort of taken away at the end by the cops and the run-in from the family. I forget which Hart just sort of falls over the rail with Austin. There's so much going on, but everyone looks great in it. Everyone kills it.
It's a half-hour match, and there's so much, it's so good to see, like, with that kind of stuff as well. And as you said, like, Jim didn't wrestle that much in that era, but he does a lot in this match too.
Yeah, it's a really good match. The whole family comes in as the pay-per-view ends to celebrate, so that's really cool to see.
Yeah.
And you can see all the kids who would then grow up to become wrestlers themselves.
Yeah, it's great.
It's kind of cool.
It's so cool.
After that, he goes to WCW, and in terms of his wrestling career, not much happens after that.
Yeah.
Of course, his daughter, Natalia, ends up becoming a big star over the past 10 years. Yeah. She's had a great career.
Davis champion. Now she was finally a women's champion as well.
Yep. And I guess Jim had a cool bonus run as a cast member on Total Divas. Yeah. I feel like a whole new audience would have known him from that. So
it popped me when I always loved it when he was on that one. It was really funny to see. He always says something really like just out there. I'm like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
I see where you're coming from.
So that that's kind of cool, and it's cool that it sort of, in a way, it ends with him sort of getting the spotlight again. Yeah,
absolutely. There's one thing I want to touch on, which you shared on your Twitter this morning as a bit of a tribute. It was this was from his player select promo on the Nitro game.
Yes.
Was this the N64 one, or was this...
No, the 64 didn't have videos. I'm pretty sure only the PlayStation versions
the PlayStation
and the PC
version.
version did.
Okay.
So the PlayStation, you select your character and they'll cut a little promo for you. Jim Neidhart's is one of the absolute best.
Hey! You gotta pick the Anvil, baby, because there's no way anybody is gonna beat an Anvil. You ever see an Anvil drop on someone's head? Oh.
Amazing.
It's the best. It's so good.
That sums it up right there.
It pretty much sums up the character he had and that intensity in that promo carried out to the ring as well.
Yeah.
So cool.
20 seconds sums it up. The Anvil, one of the all-time greats. Check out all those matches we recommended. That's pretty much why we wanted to do this.
Yeah, pretty much, because I'm pretty sure in our first episode, Bret Hart is in my top 5 favorite wrestlers of all time, but mainly due to Jim Neidhart being with him, I guess.
Oh, as a tag team,
absolutely. Yeah. I feel like that's what made me love Bret Hart was the tag team run of his because of who he was with.
Yeah, it becomes a huge part of it.
So we talked about the SummerSlam match from 1990, but there was a promo before the Hart Foundation walked to the ring. Mind you, they are wearing the most incredible military jackets with the shoulder pads and the tassels and the double-breasted, and I'm pretty sure and Anvil was wearing one of those kind of cadet hats.
Oh, the leather caps.
Yeah, and they got the sunglasses on and they're looking absolute badass. And he cuts the most amazing promo. So I feel like this could be the best way to leave it.
Yeah, arguably their best match, a classic Anvil promo. We'll leave it on that. Rest in peace.
Well, what do you think?
think. They don't pay me to think. They pay me to be tough like an anvil. Hence the name, right? Right? It never mattered to me because when I get in the ring, I just don't care. Settle down, Anvil. Settle down.